Okay, the reading for this week is the next part in our series on classical Chinese civilization and philosophy and culture. And today we will be reading the next section on the Schunza, the most famous section of the Schunza, namely the part that deals with Xunza's idea that human nature is evil, or xing, I think is how he put it. Xing is seiteki sei, shitsu no sei in Japanese. Xing, is aka, or bad, evil in Japanese, pronounced in Chinese. Xing, human nature is evil. Xunzi, or Qing, or Xing Kuang, are his other names, but he's usually known as Xunzi. I'll be calling him Xunzi in this class. Born in 310 BC, approximately, and died approximately 219 BC. Lived at the very end of the Zhou dynasty, the very long dynasty, the last several centuries of which devolved into warring states period, and he lived at the very end of the Zhou period, so the most violent and tumultuous part of that long Zhou dynasty. Like Mencius, Mengzi, he was an advocate and interpreter of the teachings of Confucius. Okay, so first we have Confucius, Kongzi, then we have Mengzi, Mencius, who came about 100 years later, and then we have Shunza, who came a generation after Mencius. And Shunza lived through the final brutal wars, which ended with the state of Qing absorbing and unifying all the Chinese feudal states. So remember, during the Warring States period, we have 7 warring factions that were all fighting with each other for a very long time. And finally, the underdog, Qing, the Qing state, ended up gobbling up all the other warring states and unified China into the Qing dynasty. From which we get the name China, from Qing. Xunzi was a widely traveled scholar, teacher, and official. Okay, and he is best known for his idea that human nature is evil. And we will be reading that section of the Xunzi in this section. Okay, before I do that, I want to read the study questions. And once again, we have these excerpts are taken from the Sources of Chinese Tradition, and I'll put the link to that book in the description below. All right, the study questions that we'll want to consider in class. Question number 1. How does Xunzi's understanding of xing, or human nature, compare to your own? Okay, so this is kind of a personal reflection question. Question number 2. How does Xunzi's understanding of human nature compare to that of Mengzi, or Mencius? Which do you prefer, and why? And remember, Mengzi, Mencius, famously argued that humans are by nature good, as evidenced by the fact that when we see a child about to fall into a well, we naturally sympathize with the child, commiserate with the child, and try to help the child without any expectation, even without any expectation of external reward. Question number 3. So that question is, whose idea of human nature do you think is more aligned with the truth, Xunzi's or Mencius? Question number 3. Why might the 2 men from the same background, both self-appointed interpreters of Kongzi, Confucius, and only one generation apart, come up with their respective understandings of human nature? Okay, so they're both coming out of Confucius. They both claim to be interpreters of Confucius, but how and why do they arrive at these very different conclusions about human nature, about xing, ren xing? And question 4, what implications does Xunzi's understanding of human nature have for family life and government? Okay, so Han Feizi, of course, will come out of the Xunzi school of human nature, the understanding of human nature, and come up with the Fajia, or not come up with it, but elaborate and expand and develop the legalist conception of government, kind of Machiavellian idea of statescraft that employs very harsh punishment and laws and so forth. So what sort of implications does Xunzi's understanding of xing, human nature, have for both family life and government, is that question. All right. Now here is the longer version of the selections. Human nature is evil, starting with the famous line, xing ren xing zhi in the original Chinese. Human nature is evil. Its good derives from conscious activity. Now it is human nature to be born with a fondness for profit. Indulging this... Here, wait, I lost my place. Hold on one second. Okay, now it is human nature, xing, to be born with a fondness for profit. Indulging this leads to contention and strife, and the sense of modesty and yielding with which one was born disappears. So modesty and yielding are there with you from the get-go, according to Schunza. One is born with feelings of envy and hate, and by indulging these, one is led into banditry and theft, so that the sense of loyalty and good faith with which one was born disappears. Okay, so you're born with these two aspects that compete, and eventually the evil takes over. One is born with the desires of the ears and the eyes, and with the fondness for beautiful sights and sounds, and by indulging these, one is led to licentiousness and chaos, so that the sense of ritual, li, righteousness, yi, refinement, and principle, li, with which one was born is lost. So the bad parts of human nature, the desires and so forth, the cravings, quickly win out, is what he's saying. Hence, following human nature and indulging human emotions will inevitably lead to contention and strife. So according to the Taoists, you should follow your human nature, follow your emotions, and that will lead to the good. But he's saying not quite. Following human nature, which is more or less evil, will lead to contention and strife, causing one to rebel against one's proper duty, yi, reduce principle, li, to chaos, and revert to violence. Therefore, one must be transformed by the example of a teacher. Okay, so the role of the teacher is extremely important for Schunza. As we saw in the previous lesson too. Remember, he talked about how the junta must serve as models for the rest of the population so they can emulate and follow them. Will inevitably lead to hold on. Therefore, one must be transformed. So one must be transformed. You don't want to just cultivate what you already have. You want to fundamentally transform the human. Therefore, one must be transformed by the example of a teacher and guided by the way, the Tao, of ritual li and rightness yi, before one will attain modesty and yielding, accord with refinement and ritual, and return to order. From this perspective, it is apparent that human nature, xing, is evil, and that its goodness is the result of conscious activity. Next paragraph. Thus, warped wood, and this is his famous metaphor of warped wood. Thus, warped wood must be laid against a straightening board, steamed, and bent into shape before it can become straight. Okay, so the humans are born crooked and warped, and they must be straightened. Blunt metal must be ground on a whetstone before it can become sharp. And in that human nature is evil, it must wait for the example of a teacher before it can become upright, and for ritual, li, and rightness, yi, before it can become orderly. Now, if people lack the examples of teachers, they will be partial and narrow rather than upright. If they lack ritual and rightness, li and yi, they will be rebellious and chaotic rather than orderly. In ancient times, the sage kings, recognizing that the nature of human beings is evil, that they incline toward evil and are not upright, that they are disposed toward chaos and are not orderly, created ritual and rightness and established models and limits in order to reform and improve the human emotional nature, the Qing, Zhou, kanji, nasake, and make it upright in order to train and transform the human emotional nature and provide it with a good guide. Okay, so note that he's saying he's not coming up with this idea that human nature is evil. He's saying that the ancient sages understood this and that Confucius understood it, but he's sort of expounding, or he's sort of developing it even further, elaborating on this idea. They cause them to attain order and to conform to the Tao, the way. And so today a person who is transformed by the instructions of a teacher devotes himself to study and abides by ritual li and rightness yi may become a noble person, a junzi, while one who follows his nature and emotions, his xing and his qing, right? So the kanji say, I'll put the kanji in the description below, but these are two very key words, nature and emotions, and they're linked in his idea, in his thought. Human nature is evil because human emotions are prone to evil as well. While one who follows his nature and emotions is content to give free play to his passions and abandons ritual li and rightness yi is a lesser person, a xiaoreng. It is obvious from this, therefore, that human nature, xing, is evil, and that its goodness results from conscious activity. Okay, so it is only the conscious activity of the mind, xing, the heart or mind, xing, that can will the innately or the fundamentally evil human nature and transform it into something that is good. Next paragraph. Mengzi, Mencius, said, the fact that human beings learn shows that their nature is good. Now he's arguing against Mencius. Keep in mind, this whole essay is this section of the Schunza is an implicit attack on Mencius. So he says, I say that this is not so. So it is not so that the fact that human beings learn shows that their nature is good. I say that this is not so. This comes of his having neither understood human nature, so he's criticizing Mencius here for not understanding human nature, xing, nor perceiving the distinction between the nature and conscious activity. Okay, so Mencius failed to understand the difference between xing, nature, human nature, and xing, the heart, conscious activity, or shi, deliberate effort, the will. The nature is what is given by Tian, heaven. One cannot learn it. Can't learn nature. It's there from the get-go, from heaven. One cannot acquire it by effort. Ritual and rightness, so Li and Yi, are created by sages. People learn them and are capable through effort of bringing them to completion. What cannot be learned or acquired by effort, but is within us, is called the nature, the xing. What can be learned and through effort brought to completion is called conscious activity, or I think it's shi, kokorozashi in the original. Is the kanji, conscious activity or deliberate effort. This is the distinction between the nature and conscious activity. That the eyes can see and the ears can hear is human nature, but the faculty of clear sight does not exist apart from the eye, nor does the faculty of keen hearing exist apart from the ear. It is apparent that the eye's clear vision and the ear's acute hearing cannot be learned. And now he takes up the next point with Mencius. Mencius said, now human nature is good, and when it is not this, and this is always a result of having lost or destroyed one's nature. Okay, so Mencius said that human nature is fundamentally good, and when we encounter even evil in the world, it is because humans have lost that sense of innate goodness, or destroyed that sense of innate goodness. I say that he was mistaken to take such a view. Now it is human nature that, as soon as a person is born, he departs from his original substance and from his natural position, so that he must inevitably lose and destroy them. Okay, so Shunza seems to be conceding that humans are born with this sort of innate goodness, but it immediately disappears on the second day of life, or maybe at age 1 or something. Seen in this way, humans almost immediately destroy that innate goodness and immediately veer toward evil and toward sin, I guess you could say. Seen in this way, it is apparent that human nature is evil. Those who say that the nature is good find beauty in what does not depart from the original substance, and value in what does not diverge from the natural disposition. They consider that the beauty of the natural disposition and the original substance and the goodness of the mind's intentions are inseparable from the nature, in the same way that clear sight is inseparable from the eye and keen hearing inseparable from the ear. Hence they maintain that the nature possesses goodness in the same way that the eye possesses clear vision or the ear possesses keenness of hearing. All right, we have several more pages, so let me take a break here very briefly. All right, we got to pick up the pace. I want to get through this as quickly as possible. Now, it is human nature, xing, that when one is hungry, he will desire satisfaction. When he is cold, he will desire warmth. And when he is weary, he will desire rest. So he's talking about the desires, the cravings now. This is the emotional nature of human beings. Yet even if a person is hungry, he will not dare to be the first to eat if he is in the presence of his elders, because he knows that he should yield to them. Although he is weary, he will not dare to seek rest, because he knows that he should work on behalf of others. For a son to yield to his father and a younger brother to yield to his elder brother, or for a son to work on behalf of his father and a younger brother to work on behalf of his elder brother, These two acts are contrary to the nature and counter to the emotions, and yet they represent the way of filial devotion, xiao, and the refinement and principle that are associated with ritual, li, and rightness, yi. So humans are capable of doing these things, but it doesn't come natural to them, right? It has to be sort of forced through education and through will. Hence, to follow the emotional nature would mean that there would be no courtesy or humility, right? So that if you are hungry and you see a banquet and food at the table, and give in to your desires and just gobble up the whole thing before your elders can get to the food, that is something that is evil, but we are able to avoid that kind of behavior due to these external these external forces such as yi and li, propriety, yi, righteousness. Hence, to follow the emotional nature would mean that there would be no courtesy or humility. Courtesy and humility run counter to emotional nature. From this perspective, it is apparent that human nature is evil, and that goodness is the result of conscious activity, 是, kokorozashi, deliberation, will. A questioner asks, if human nature is evil, then where do ritual and rightness comes from? Okay, if human nature is evil, how can we get these good things, such as ritual, li, and rightness, yi? And his reply, I reply, ritual and rightness are always created by the conscious activity, by the shi, of the sages. So the sages are human and therefore born with this evil nature just like everybody else, but being sages, they are able to use their conscious activity to create these good forces. Essentially, they are not created by human nature. So it isn't human nature that creates yi and li. It is the conscious activity of the sages. Thus a potter, here's his famous metaphor of the potter, so underline this. Thus a potter molds clay and makes a vessel, but the vessel is created by the conscious activity of the potter, and is not created by his human nature. In the same way, a carpenter carves a piece of wood and makes a utensil, but the utensil is created through the conscious activity of the carpenter. It is not created by his human nature. Okay, this metaphor of the carpenter too is famous. Underline this. We'll discuss it more in class. A sage gathers his thoughts and reflections, engages in conscious activity, kokorozashi, and thus creates ritual, li, and rightness, yi, and produces models and regulations. Hence ritual, yi, rightness, ritual, li, rightness, yi, models and limits are created by the conscious activity of the sage and not by his human nature. Next paragraph. When a person desires to do good, he always does so because his nature is evil. A person who is shallow aspires to depth. One who is ugly aspires to beauty. One who is narrow aspires to breadth. One who is poor aspires to wealth. One who is humble aspires to esteem. Whatever one lacks in oneself, he must seek outside. Therefore, if a person is rich, he will not aspire to wealth. If he is esteemed, he will not long for power. So you long for that which you lack. What a person possesses in himself, he need not seek outside. One can see from this that the reason human beings desire to do good is that their nature is evil. So because we're evil, we seek to counter that by by doing good, by trying to attain what we lack, namely the good. Now human nature, xing, is definitely devoid of ritual, yi, and li, and rightness, yi. Therefore they compel themselves to study, shui, and to seek to possess them. The nature knows nothing, the xing knows nothing of ritual, yi, and rightness, li, and rightness, yi, and therefore they reflect and ponder and seek to understand them. Thus the nature, xing, is inborn. That is all. And human beings neither possess ritual, li, and rightness, nor do they understand them. So these things are external, created by these sages through conscious activity. Next paragraph. If human nature were good, we could dispense with the sage kings and desist from the practice of ritual and rightness. Right? So it's precisely because we are not good that we need these things that Confucius handed over to us. Since human nature is evil, we must elevate the sages and esteem ritual, li, and rightness, yi. Therefore the straightening board was created, so back to his metaphor of the straightening board, was created because of warped wood. So we are warped wood, therefore the straightening board, which is a metaphor of course for for ritual and rightness. Therefore, the straightening board was created because of warped wood, and the plumb line came into being because of things that are not straight. Rulers are established, and ritual and rightness are illuminated because the nature is evil. From this perspective, it is clear that human nature is evil, and that goodness is the result of shi, conscious activity. Wood that is straight need not wait for the straightening board to become straight. It is straight by nature. But a warped piece of wood, which is what we are, must be laid against the straightening board, steamed, and bent into shape before it can become straight, because its nature is not straight. Now, since human nature is evil, people must await ordering by the sage kings and transformation through ritual and rightness, and only then do they attain order and accord with goodness. From this perspective, it is clear that human nature is evil, and that goodness is a result of conscious activity. So he repeats his main thesis several times throughout this section of his work. Next paragraph. Someone may ask whether ritual and rightness and sustained conscious activity are not themselves human nature, xing, which would explain why the sage is able to create them. So he responds to this contention by saying, I reply that this is not the case. A potter may mold clay and produce an earthen pot, but how could molding pots out of clay be the potter's nature? So back to his metaphor of the potter. A carpenter may carve wood and produce utensils, but how could carving utensils out of wood be the carpenter's nature? So we do these things not by nature, but by conscious activity. The sage understands in the same relation to ritual and rightness as the potter to the things he molds and produces. How then could ritual and rightness and sustained conscious activity be the original human nature, or xing? In their human nature, Yao and Shun were one with Jie and Zhi. Okay, so remember, Yao and Shun are the great sage kings of that Confucius often extols as models, and Jie and Zhi are the two infamous tyrannical kings of the past. So in their human nature, the good Yao and Shun were one with the bad Jie and Zhi. Just as the noble person, the Xunza, and the lesser person, the Shang, are by nature one. How could it be that ritual and rightness and sustained conscious activity are human nature? If this were the case, what reason would there be to honor Yao or Yu, or to honor the noble person, the Xunzi? People honor Yao, Yu, and the noble person because of their ability to transform their xing, their nature. So Yao and Yu, and Yao and Yu and Shun, these models of human behavior, are good because they were able to transform their nature, to generate conscious activity, and through this conscious activity to create ritual, li, and rightness, yi. Thus the sage, the Shang, underlined sage, it's come up several times, but we'll go over the Chinese character in class. The sage is the Shang, or sei in Japanese. Thus the sage necessarily stands in the same relation to ritual and rightness and conscious activity as does the potter to the things he molds and produces. From this perspective, how could it be that ritual and rightness and sustained conscious activity are human nature? The reason people despise Jie, the tyrannical king, or the lesser person, the Xiaoreng, who is antithetical to the Junzi, is that they follow their nature. They indulge their emotions, and they are content to give free rein to their passions, their qing, nasake, so that their conduct is marked by greed and contentiousness. Therefore it is clear that human nature is evil, and that goodness is the result of shi, kokorozashi, conscious activity. The man in the street can become a yu. This was apparently an old saying. Mencius mentions it, as it notes here in the footnote. Mencius said, yes, it is true that all human beings are capable of becoming a sage king, a wise sage king, a Yao or a Shun. The man in the street said, the man in the street can become a Yu. What does this mean? I reply, what made the sage Emperor Yu a Yu was the fact that he practiced ren, humaneness, and rightness, yi, and took uprightness as his standard. This being so, humaneness, ren, rightness, yi, and proper standards must be based upon principles, li, that can be known and practiced. Any man in the street has the natural endowment needed to understand humaneness, ren, righteousness yi, proper standards and uprightness, and the ability to practice humaneness rang, rightness yi, proper standards and uprightness. Therefore it is clear that he can become a yu. Okay, so we possess the means. From day one, from the start, we possess the means by which we can transform ourselves into something good, but we ourselves are not innately good, is his argument. Is one to suppose that humaneness, rightness, proper standards, and uprightness are not based upon principles li that can be known in practice? If that were so, then even a yu could not have understood and practiced them. Is one to suppose that the man in the street does not have the natural endowment needed to understand them or the ability to put them into practice? If that were so, then the man in the street within his family could not understand the rightness yi that pertains between father and son, and without could not comprehend the correctness the yi that pertains between ruler and subject. But this is not the case. The man in the street within can understand the rightness that pertains between father and son, and without can understand the correctness between ruler and subject. Thus it is clear that he has in him the natural endowment needed to understand, and the talent, the zai, to put them into practice. Now if the man in the street takes this endowment and enables him to know, and this talent that enables him to act and applies them to the principles of ren, humaneness, and rightness yi, which are knowable, and the practice of humaneness, ren, and rightness yi, which is practicable, then it is clear that he can become a yu, a sage king yu. If the man in the street, so the man in the street can become a sage king. So there's some there's an optimistic element to Shunza's sort of dark thesis that humans are evil. They are evil, yes, but they can all they have the potential within them, the means within them, to become a sage king if they want to, if they have enough conscious will power. If the man in the street applies himself to training and study, shui, right, and study is what he discussed in the passage that we've already discussed, another passage from the Schunza. If the man in the street applies himself to training and study, if he concentrates his mind, if he unifies his will, his shi, and if he, and pondering and examining things carefully, continues his efforts over a long period of time, accumulating good acts without stop, then he can penetrate to a spiritual understanding and form a triad with Tiandi, heaven and earth. The sage, the Shang, is a person who has arrived where he has through the accumulation of good acts. Okay, so it ends this section on about this section that puts forth his thesis that human nature is evil, ends on a somewhat optimistic note. All right, this was longer than I expected. We'll go over this in more detail in class and talk about the questions that are on the study questions that I mentioned above. And that is all for now. See you in class later. Goodbye.